What if I told you that Realme was able to give users the upgrades they most want in a phone, particularly a bigger and faster display, a better camera, more RAM, and a larger battery life, at the same time while making the phone cheaper and or slightly more expensive? Because that's exactly what they did with the Realme 10 Pro Plus, the most premium mid-range phone from the Realme 10 series. So if you compare the Realme 9 Pro Plus and this Realme 10 Pro Plus, the newer phone is now bigger in display, battery, RAM, and camera. However, Realme 9 Pro Plus was only available in 8GB and 256GB for 23,990 pesos. The Realme 10 Pro Plus now has a base model of 8GB and 120GB for only 19,899. And while the top model costs 24,899, the 256 storage is coupled with 12GB of RAM. That's plenty for what mobile phones typically need today, especially for the typical consumers out there. Not to mention the ability to create virtual RAM through the use of storage space. But essentially, Realme 10 Pro Plus is looking like a good deal already from the surface, when you don't compare it with other phones like the Honor X9A that I recently reviewed. Links below to see the video. But really, the only thing that stayed here is the Dimensity 920 5G chip, the 16-megapixel selfie camera, and the 60-watt fast charging, which is actually a bit faster, now rated at 67 watts. And speaking of the charger, this is one of, if not the fastest 67 watts phones I've ever tested by far. Realme lets this phone go from empty to full in just 40 minutes. With other 67 watt phones from other brands, they still require 60 to 65 minutes, but here it's below 15 minutes and you're good to go. And this is a 5000 mAh cell even, which is crazy. But going back to the chip for a second, I think Realme managed to keep the price down by keeping the same chip from last year, which is basically cheaper to procure and produce now. However, in some regions like China, those versions come with the Dimensity 1080. Essentially, it's the 920 but with around a 5% boost in CPU according to synthetic benchmarks like Antutu, but with no significant upgrade on GPU performance. So if you're a gamer and looking for a considerable upgrade from your Realme 9 Pro Plus, you're not going to find it here. Since we're on the topic of performance, let's discuss Realme UI 4.0. So that's based on Android 13 already. Apparently, Realme promised up to 2 years of software upgrades, pushing the support up to Android 15 presumably. But performance-wise, Realme has done some quirky things here. The day-to-day performance of this phone is just fine, You still get the benefit of the smoothness of the fast refresh rate and good chipset performance. But Realme's software is kinda aggressive when it comes to the refresh rate. So even if you put the display settings to 120Hz all the time, Realme UI won't let you enjoy all those frames because, for the most part, the screen will trickle down to either 90Hz or 60Hz, depending on the app you have open. So immediately, I thought the screen was slow because even the touch response rate was slow. I actually had to look for a way to force the screen to stay at 120Hz, which involved downloading an app and editing a system setting that should be done every time you restart this phone. And yes, the screen still sets itself to 60Hz to save battery if left after a few seconds. Although if you're expecting games to support 120Hz randomly, that still depends on the game developers. Even Alto's Odyssey is still stuck at 60Hz here. Unfortunately, the weird quirk doesn't end there. Realme UI always transforms YouTube picture-in-picture mode to a square instead of a rounded square. The same goes for Netflix. The keyboard on Facebook Messenger pops up again when you try to exit from typing, which is really annoying. And when you're chatting through a chat head, you can't properly select the text. Always on display doesn't show notification icons for some reason. Links from apps like Facebook don't open at times, requiring you to reload the app, and some areas of the UI are straight up laggy, like the shelf when you swipe to the right from the home screen, or the Play Store which seems allergic to optimization. I'm hoping in the next updates this would get fixed because I like Realme UI. It's clean, customizable, and has a ton of features to expand its functionality. But what about the display? It's a tad larger at 6.7 inches and also brighter, topping at 419 nits in manual mode and above 800 nits in auto mode. Most people probably will love the bigger screen, but because this is a curved screen, it's still one-hand friendly. Additionally, the palm rejection is great, so you can still use this phone with one hand without having to worry about false palm touches. And unlike lower-end mid-range phones, this one lets you stream YouTube up to 4K resolution for the best possible quality. The under-the-display fingerprint scanner is relatively fast and accurate, but those bezel, man, look slim and sexy. This is an exceptional display in this price range. Let's not forget about the design as well. I may be sporting the usual black color, but the matte finish feels smooth in the hand even when it's made of plastic. But really, I have two favorite parts of this design: the finish that never picks up fingerprint smudges, and the camera and LED presentation. Combine those two things and you get a really clean looking minimal phone design. This phone is on the hefty side if I'm to compare it with the Honor X98, but unlike Realme 9 Pro Plus, this phone loses the ability to support wired headphones, so you would have to buy a third-party adapter if you still want to use your wired headphone. And much like most phones today, you can expand the storage here. The stereo speakers are decent, it's loud enough at max volume, although there's not much room for bass. Realme made room for extra loudness at the expense of buzzy and distorted audio. You just simply press the volume up button until the slider says 200%. The haptics is good here. It's not buzzy, it has a certain depth, if that makes sense, whenever it gets triggered. But what about the cameras? The secondary sensors on the Realme 10 Pro stayed, so the ultra-wide is still 8 megapixel, the macro is still 2 megapixel, and the selfie camera is still 16 megapixel. The only hardware upgrade here is the 108 megapixel sensor, previously 50 megapixel on the last year's iteration. And just like other 108 megapixel phones, this also captures sharp photos and sharp 4K videos. The only thing it lacks is OIS for stable photos and videos, so anything 4K has no stabilization. But there are two stabilization modes, one at 1080p using the main camera and the second using the ultra-wide, and yes, both work as advertised and they're great for their intended use. When it comes to the overall quality of the sensors, this might be the first time I had a hard time describing the camera performance of a phone. I can't confidently tell that they are great, but I also can't tell you that they are bad. Good enough, I guess? Hit or miss? Usually it's easy to get great quality photos when good lighting is present, and that's mostly true here. But there are times when photos taken with the main camera look overexposed or out of focus. There's even some occasional occurrence where the photos taken at 3x zoom have a pale unsaturated look. There are times when photos look sharp, but there are also times when they look soft. But when the phone nails the subjects, the photos you get are great. They look sharp, in focus, colorful, albeit overexposed and a bit oversaturated at times, but all in all, they look just fine. I guess the best way to describe the cameras of this phone, at least in photos, is inconsistent. This can be possibly fixed with software updates, but hopefully, Realme, you're listening. I also wish Realme dialed down the HDR processing because HDR photos tended to look overly cartoony 8 times out of 10. By the way, there's an interesting feature in 108 megapixel mode, where if you press this button and capture a photo, it'll return a group of photos that were smartly cropped by the phone. It seems cool, but most of the time it's just a space eater since it's taking multiple 108 megapixel photos. Videos, however, are consistent, fortunately. While 4K captures better overall quality, albeit over-sharpened, there's no stabilization as mentioned earlier. And if you should know, there's also no 4K 60 option. 1080p, on the other hand, looks stable with balanced colors. You can get really solid video quality at 1080p even at 60 frames. It's a different story when it comes to the selfie camera. It's hard to get a great quality selfie unless there's plenty of lighting. The dynamic range is also very limited, so more often than not, the colors will look washed out, blown out, and basically not that good looking. Now that I've told you almost everything about the Realme 10 Pro Plus, there's one more thing you need to know. This is a China ROM model. I got this without Google installed out of the box, but interestingly, it's easy to install Google Play services with Realme China ROM phones. You just need to download and install a Google Play Store APK. From there, you could download all the apps you need. The experience would then be similar to that of the global ROM model with pre-installed Google services. So you might be wondering what's the difference between a global ROM and a China ROM with side-loaded Google apps and services. For starters, there is a lot of Chinese text or characters you'll see from different parts of the UI. For example, this built-in calendar widget has a Chinese translation of the month and date. Other widgets as well have Chinese text. But the good thing is when you drag it to the home screen, it translates to English. However, you will still find untranslatable Chinese text in the deepest part of the settings, like this Hyper Boost feature in games. You will definitely find more of this in some parts, but what you also need to take note of is the number of Chinese bloatware. None of them are uninstallable or can be disabled, but the workaround here is to withdraw the consent in the setting and disable notifications for each app, which may be an effort to most, but if you want a global ROM-like experience, you have to commit to those extra steps. Another worth mentioning is the number of permissions you need to set for almost every single thing you do, whether that's accessing the camera or opening an app. However, once you're all past that, you don't ever have to do it again. But the biggest catch here, I guess for some of you, is the lack of the Google hot word. I've installed the Google Assistant app, and although it works when you press a button, you won't be able to trigger "Hey Google" here simply because the phone won't let you. Fortunately, I don't use it that much, so it's not a big deal to me. But yes, that's Realme 10 Pro Plus for you. That's it for this one. Drop a sub or like if you feel like supporting the channel, and as always, until the next one, stay safe.